What's going on, everybody? I get this question a lot. What is the difference between vibrance and saturation? When should I use vibrance and saturation? What's better than the other? And I'm going to break this down to you in a very simple way. I'm going to use the histogram to highlight my point and a few example photos, and hopefully this will make more sense. Looking at this first photo here, I want you to pay attention to the histogram here. These are your blacks, and these are your whites, and everything else in the middle we'll call midtones. Now watch when I use the vibrance slider. Watch, pay close attention. Okay, this is all the way to 90%. This is pretty far. I've brought this vibrance as far as you can go. You'll see that the whites never reached the end. They kind of stayed to themselves here. And the blacks, especially on this side here, didn't really move. Now let me move it back slowly so you can look. Okay, good. You see, when you increase the vibrance, the whites and the blacks, the darkest areas and the brightest areas of the photograph are not affected. Let's reset that now. However, when we go to saturation, pay attention to those two areas again. Look at the blacks. Look at the blacks. You see? You see here? The blacks are affected. Now look. Now go back, because your eyes can only look at one place at one time. Look at the whites. And as we raise the saturation, you see the whites are affected as well. The difference between vibrance and saturation is that saturation affects all colors across the entire spectrum, whereas vibrance doesn't affect your darkest and your brightest points in the photograph. Let's look at this example here. Again, we look at our histogram. As we raise the vibrance, and this is leading me into my next point. Look how the colors get separated here. Look at your yellows and your reds getting separated from the blues. See how they're shifting to the left, but yet your blacks and your whites are not moving, not really being affected. Now here's the thing that I want to point out, because this is going to be important in the next example. The reds and the yellows are not affected in the same way in vibrance that they are in saturation. That's going to be very important in the next example when we're talking about skin tones. Now let's look at vibrance, and let's look at the histogram again. And as we raise vibrance, look what happens. The yellows and the reds stay exactly where they are, and everything is just shifted down, because the saturation is going to affect all colors and all ranges, including the brighter colors and the grays that aren't affected by vibrance. And of course, if you take saturation all the way down, you have a black and white photograph. But we have black and white filters for that, so why would you do that? I don't see any reason to do that. Okay. Last example. This is going to become very apparent here. Remember what I said, vibrance doesn't affect your whitest parts and your darkest parts. So for example, if I zoom in on this armpit here, this is pretty much the darkest I have here. I'll even lower my exposure just a little bit to show there. And we increase the vibrance. That's 81%. You'll notice no change at 81%. If we go here to our whitest areas and we increase the vibrance, no change. You'll get a little change in here, but because that's not pure white. So again, if you look at our histogram here and we increase the vibrance, there's no change on my whites. Now there's a lot of whites in this photograph because it was overexposed on the fence, and there's no change here in the blacks. And as we increase the saturation, you'll see that everything in the black is getting affected, and of course the whites are still being affected as well. Now here's what I want to point out. Major difference when editing skin tones. If you look at the model, and let's say we increase our vibrance to 35 to 40%. Take a look at her skin. 35, let's say, okay, there's 37. Skin still looks good, still looks pretty natural, right? You'll see the red on her jeans popped. The blue looks pretty good. It obviously adds more color and more vibrance to the photograph. However, if we take our saturation up to the same level, to 37, look how fake she looks. Kind of like an Oompa Loompa, if you know that movie. But she's very orange, like Trump. Sorry, Trump. yeah, it affects all, as I said, it affects all the colors equally across the board. So remember in my second example, I told you that the reds and the yellows are affected separately or differently with Vibrance. So that's why, in my personal opinion, I prefer to use Vibrance whenever editing a photograph that has any skin tones in it whatsoever. Now, if you have a picture of a landscape with mountains and green grass and things like that, and you would just want to add a little bit more pop, then do saturation. But for me personally, I never go beyond 10 or 12 in my saturation. There's almost no examples of when I will go higher than that in saturation, because I don't like to make all my colors pop so much, because I think at some point it looks fake. So my advice to you is always use Vibrance whenever doing anything with skin tones. A little bit of Vibrance, 21, 22, 23%, somewhere in there goes a long way. And Vibrance, again, is not affected by the blacks, not affected by the whites. Vibrance affects everything in the middle, but it favors the red and yellow skin tones, or red and yellow colors, because they're in the skin tones. Saturation affects everything. I hope that was crystal clear. I tried to make this video as quick as possible to get you those answers so you don't have to waste your valuable time. If you did get any value from this video, please consider subscribing. I make videos, well, I'm making videos a lot more now, but I especially appreciate all the comments and the questions and the love. And if you have any questions for me or anything like that, or maybe you'd like to see another video pertaining to Lightroom, and if you have any additional questions, I'd love to answer those for you. Please leave your comments down below. And as always, I'm Mr. Brian James. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.